Welcome to the Girly Organist podcast, where we discuss insider perspectives and practical processes in church music, academia, and the creative arts. I'm Dr. Rebecca Rockpotty, also known as the Girly Organist. I am a UK-based academic and organist and director of music in the Anglican Church. Today's episode is titled Church Music and Modesty. Church Music and Modesty 2024, is that still a thing? Oh boy, yes it is. So a little bit about my background. I grew up in the Brethren Church, which is very closed, and there was all sorts of rules. Now, these rules were well-meaning. I am saying this as somebody that's I don't have any trauma associated with these rules. I was quite compliant and quite happy to follow them for my growing up portion of my life, and they sort of definitely impacted the way that I engaged with music and worship in the church growing up. And I suppose this is how do I feel about it now, being in a different tradition and sort of on the other side of some of those conversations. So there was a rule book, and girls had to they couldn't show their collarbones, so I couldn't wear this, I'd have to wear a scarf. You couldn't show your shoulders or your elbows, your heels, toes, knees were out. You had to wear some sort of head covering, bandana. Maybe that's why I quite like wearing headbands, because I wore these little bandana things quite a lot growing up. And you weren't supposed to wear anything super clingy. So you could wear attractive clothing, things that would sort of, I don't know, show your figure a little bit, but not too much. They couldn't be clingy. That was a key component. Now, I'm saying there was this rule book. There was a rule book, but let me be clear, it wasn't just a rule book for girls. The boys also had a list of rules that they had to follow about sportswear and ties and the type of shoes and the haircuts, the length of haircut. And looking back, it was pretty much like being in the Air Cadets, or that sort of organisation with a uniform requirement. So I started to play in worship when I was perhaps 11, and I dabbled before, but it wasn't of any sort of meaningful quality. It would be like a kids club, that sort of thing. However, when I got old enough and to a suitable grade on my violin, it was usually violin, I was allowed to start playing in worship, and that was sort of probably one of the first points that this conversation around modesty came into my frame of reference. Now, I have to say, I never really had a particular problem with wearing a long skirt. I'm a dress girly anyway, so it wasn't such a hardship for me personally. I know that's not the case for everyone, but I didn't mind. I was always wanted to dress up and be really girly anyway, so I was quite happy to wear skirts and dresses, always dresses more than skirts, and that's followed through to my life today. But then I started to play for worship. Now, when I was playing for worship, it was very much like you're just joining in part of a team, whatever that team was made up of, and it wasn't a solo pursuit. And we'd kind of moved from the Brethren Church, which was more closed, into conservative evangelical denominations, and that meant that the rules were slightly more laxed, and unless you were going to be involved in anything that was up front. So anything that required standing in front of the congregation or people and presenting anything. So whether that's reading, doing a notice, etc. Because women weren't allowed to do very much. And So that was when it was like, okay, where you might get away in the past with wearing, you know, like a dress like this, but you'd have to wear a scarf, you now just had to wear like a long sleeve top. And I do remember like being on a camp one summer, and the worst part about it wasn't having to like get changed even though we were camping. It was always that it would be blisteringly hot, and I was like self-conscious that I would have sweat patches because I was wearing like long sleeve tops on stage with lights, and it would just be absolutely boiling. And like that was my main issue, is I'm like so embarrassing as a teenage girl having to like play violin, and like you can see that you're sweating. I mean, everyone was, because it would be like 30 degrees outside, and then put you in a tent in a field with lights, and it's like, you know, just melting for hours of practice and like the actual worship sessions, etc. So that was my kind of first introduction to serious like impact of modesty in church music on me. So there's lots of stuff, conversations around, but like the actual impact on me, that was sort of the first point where it became like into my sort of world. And I remember having a friend who is still a friend, a good friend, and one of my best friends actually. And we were at a camp, and she was singing, and she wanted to come and sing as part of the worship group. And like there was a huge fallout because people thought her top was too low, and she put a scarf on because like the top was maybe here and she had a scarf on, and people being like, you're going to cause your brothers to stumble, and that sort of conversation, heavily influenced by purity culture, you know, like I Kiss Dating Goodbye and all of those sorts of books, which is a different area but connected nonetheless. And it was very much like the onus is on you as the person at the front, especially if you're female. You can't have a leadership role, but you can be involved and not causing anyone to stumble, or like bringing the congregation's name into disrepute. And that was kind of the messaging that was given to us. So when I kind of moved into the Anglican and then Catholic tradition and was told to wear a robe, I was like, oh, this solves loads of problems. This solves loads of problems because I don't have to think about what I'm actually wearing anymore. However, there's now like this huge divergence between church music in a conservative evangelical context, which is still very much the same, because sometimes I go back and I play and like the expectations are the same. And then church music where you just wear a robe, so like the uniformity is for neatness and kind of fitting into the aesthetic, I suppose, and like putting your uniform on, ready to you for worship. And it's like a different conversation about, oh, now we're ready to worship. We weren't before, but now we are because we have our robes on. So that's always an interesting idea that comes up every week. And marry that with being the girly organist. Now, obviously, when I was in my teens, I didn't have social media. Like, I've never had any personal social media. All the social media I've ever had has really been since I've like been doing content creation online through things like the girly organist. And it's really interesting to see how this like conversation is just so complex, because I have like a performer profile, and then a church musician profile, and an academic profile. So I suppose my approach has been, I will just dress consistently across the board for all of them. And that might mean in academic contexts, perhaps I'm overdressed. It might mean that in church music context, I'm overdressed, but most of the time I'm putting a robe on, so it doesn't really matter. And it also means that in performance context, I'm always like performance ready. And this has been a really interesting sort of development, because, for example, I was recently playing for a service and I'd gone in my sparkly dress, because I always go in my sparkly dress. because it's Advent, it's Christmas, and I want to be a candle. I mean, come on. And like, I put my robe on, but people were just like commenting on my dress. Now, it's kind of a funny space, because having gone to quite a few conferences recently, one of the things that keeps coming up is like, oh, you are a bit much because you wear all of these like outlandish outfits, etc. I'm like, it's nothing compared to pop music, number one. Number two, I'm going for consistency across the board. So I know that some people would make a case for dressing differently depending on the context, whereas I think, no, I'm going to dress according to my values, and I'm going to dress in a way that is practical for the types of things that I am going to day and having to switch across. Because whilst other people may be like just at church one day, or maybe just at work at another day, I can in the same day be at an academic conference, then doing a recital, then doing some sort of podcast or video recording, etc. And then having a service in the evening. So I like go for what is the maximum like way I need to be dressed to fulfill all of these. And I don't mind being overdressed, because let's face it, I'm overdressed most of the time. I mean, I'm at work now and I'm probably overdressed for that. But I'd rather be overdressed than underdressed. And I suppose this like leaves me in a really interesting place when it comes to some of the theology and the church music space. Because like the expectation of being a recitalist in that space is different to if you were just like a pop artist or something. And so I think this idea of like being prepared for worship, or putting on your Sunday best, etc., is something that hasn't disappeared. And I mean, there's so much judgment whatever you wear anyway. So I do think like it has to align with your like core beliefs and values. If you dress in that way, you'll be fine most of the time, and feel confident, etc. But it does change the way that I dress, because in classical music there's huge conversations around, you know, thinness and the sexualization of women, etc. Unfortunately for me, being an organist that's also in classical music as well as church music, that like I just have to be really careful. And I have to be really careful because I don't try and over-sexualize the way that I dress anyway. Like that's just a life choice of mine. So there's that, and sort of not feeling like you're betraying yourselves. You know, it would be easy to just dress really provocatively and make organ videos to get loads of views, and I don't do that. There are people that do that and feel that that's something that they want to do, and no judgment. If it works for them, great. But I feel like with the particular sort of role modeling that I'm trying to do, which is, you know, play the organ as yourself. You don't need to be like this or be like that. And part of that conversation is you don't need to be overtly sexual in the way that you dress, whether male or female, to get attention. Just be good at what you're doing. So it's a really kind of strange place, because the metrics, so the majority of people that engage with my content are 80% male between the ages of 15 to mid-60s, like 68's the upper end. And the rest are women between the ages of 14 to about mid-30s. So when I look at my demographic, some of that is because I'm in academia, which is very male dominated, church music, very male dominated, organ world, very male dominated. It's just the space that I am in as a musician and artist, etc. I'm really careful about what I wear and being consistent across the board, because I just can't stand it when people like make their career off being like hypersexual in all of their images, etc. And then you see them like in a church context and you go like, people can't erase that image. So it's okay to look nice and appropriate. It's not okay to like give mixed messages. There's also the area of like not so conservative, perhaps more liberal, and I use that in a general sense, liberal, sort of worship leaders and the emergence of worship leaders. And that's something that has kind of come forth with social media through things like Elevate Worship, Elevate Music, Maranatha Music, and Hillsong, etc. And you know, obviously like these areas are quite aesthetically driven. I do find sometimes that like the song might be okay, but sometimes I do sort of question the aesthetic, and I suppose I question the importance of the aesthetic as like coming from the background that I've had. I'm like, is this about an aesthetic or is it about like leading worship? And like, what is your role as performer? What is your role as leader, director of music, worship leader, music minister, worship pastor, whatever you want to call it? Like essentially it's leading some sort of musical worship in a service. And at what point is like, can you separate your work as a performer or an artist and leading worship? And I think that that's like not an easy question to answer. Like it's something that I myself find on a weekly basis. Like I don't wear flower crowns the majority of the time when I am directing the choir, and that is intentional because it's not about me in that moment, it's about leading the congregation in worship. I might wear them on special occasions like Easter Sunday or perhaps Christmas Eve or Christmas Day, like special occasions where, you know, like most people have dressed up a little bit and the choir might have, you know, funny earrings or things like that, carol concerts, etc. Because at those points there is a kind of pageantry associated with, yes, it's worship, but there's like a certain amount of pageantry above and beyond the regular pattern of worship that is different to you know, like a Eucharist, etc. But it's not a regular thing, me wearing a flower crown as a director of music in a worship context. And you know, I played for a service recently and a funeral, etc. And like, I wear headbands anyway, but they're not all flowery. And you know, when I am giving a lecture, I'm generally not wearing a flower crown. I'll be wearing a headband. It might be sparkly. It might have like subtle flowers or beaded flowers or something on it, but it won't be like one of these level flower crowns because it's not appropriate to the context. So I suppose on this idea of worship and modesty, one of the key things that I try to maintain is a consistency across the board in the messaging that I send out. I'm conscious that I'm working with boys and girls and children's choirs. I'm conscious that I'm representing, you know, the Priory or Cathedral or wherever I've been at the time. I'm conscious that, you know, whether you're intentionally trying to be a role model or not, young people are looking at what you do, and sort of it's easy to have messaging, especially in classical music, even more so than church music, where it's like, oh, it's all about, you know, the technical aspect or etc. And like, yes, being a technical player is a really valuable thing and excellent. You know, but like when I invite people to come and watch my recitals, I want them to have a whole experience, and that is the Girly Organist, and that is the place for that. When they come to worship, I want them to experience like worship in its fullest, and I don't think that I should be standing out in any way particularly. Like, I don't think that it's not about me as the individual, and I think just being sort of consistent with that messaging and across the board as a performer artist, because we have portfolio careers now are the norm, and like that's one of the hardest things to build, especially when, like me, you're in so many, on the face of it, different areas. I see them as quite connected, but other people look at them and like, oh, this is random. It's not random to me. There's sort of threads going through them all. But so keeping consistent messaging. When I do academic conferences, sometimes I will wear a sparkly headband, usually. If I'm not wearing a sparkly headband, I will be full flower crown. But just know, if you see me at an academic conference wearing a full flower crown, it will be because the research I'm talking about is connected to the Girly Organist. And so yes, I'm an academic and I'm a performer, and I am merging those two roles when I turn up in full Girly Organist showmanship element, but I'm presenting my academic research, because I'm usually after some sort of reaction or conversation, or the topic of my research and presentation or paper is directly connected to that. The rest of the time, like not all of the research I do includes the Girly Organist. Like I wouldn't wear that, I'd just go, like I wore this to one of the conferences I went to recently. It's cute, it's in line with what I normally wear, but it's not like a full performance, because when I'm presenting my research, I'm presenting my research. I'm not giving an organ recital trying to just be a crowd pleaser. I want people to ask interesting questions. And one of the things, like in church music, I have been called all sorts of names, both good and bad. I think my favourite ones are, I was walking in and I had this sparkly headband on, as it happens. This is maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and like a robe on, red robe. I didn't have whites, I just had a red robe on, and I was called a tart. And I was like, interesting. And the follow-up to me being called a tart was because I wear dresses. I was like, I don't think that's what qualifies you for being a tart, but interesting connection. So just the fact that I'm female and wear dresses automatically in this person's mind means I'm a tart. Nice. I then recently, this last year in my conference rounds, academic conference rounds, got called ridiculous because I'm wearing a dress. And it was like, well, I wear trousers because they're practical. And I was like, well, like practicality is different for everyone because it depends how you live your life. So what might be practical for one person is not practical for another person. And for me, wearing dresses is really practical. And I'll share one of the main reasons actually it's practical is because I am here, there and everywhere, very busy, having to jump from one thing to another, and basically a dress is a whole outfit. Like if I have to start thinking about trousers, matching socks, different types of shoes, belts, like blazers, shirts not pulling and fitting right, like it's just too much, which is why I wear dresses, because it's one look, like one and done. And a lot of the dresses that I wear are actually like the same dress in different colours, and that is essentially, I just wake up and I'm like, what colour do I want to wear today? But I know that I'm going to get the look consistently that I want over the time. There's one dress, I think I have it in like 11 colours, which is insane that I have that many, and that's only one style of dress. But like that is my desert island dress. And when I found that dress, I was like, this is suitable for performance, it's suitable for photo shoots, it's suitable for interviews, it's suitable for worship, it's suitable for conferences, it's suitable for lecturing, it's suitable for choir directing, and like it serves me time and time again in all of those contexts. I'm not having to like be at the front of church and like pulling my dress up, or like I'm not having to think, oh, this is a bit short, like I'll just pull it down, you know. So on a really sort of practical level, insider perspectives, people will always have things to comment. Just make sure that you are consistently like sharing the same message. Like consistent messaging in what you wear is really powerful. And for me, like modesty is part of that. I don't wear like super low things. I don't like rarely have my arms out. I do wear shorter things if it's hot, not gonna lie, I do, but like we're talking just above the knees usually. They're not like really short. But then, you know, to counter that, they're kind of still got a high neck and puff sleeves, so there's still like quite a lot of fabric around, and that is just important to me. I'm not saying that it has to be important to other people, but like when you are a female and a performer and you are going across academia, which is, you know, face it, it's suits, like people wear suits, it's office, formal attire. When you are in church music, suits, robes, etc. When you're a performer who's a girly girl, like I did grow up with the mantra of you put your Sunday best on to go to church, you go into the house of God, like, you know, make an effort. I do think there is something in that, making an effort to make yourself presentable. And I suppose for me, one of the things that people find really strange is that like I dress like this all the time, whereas for them it would be like a special occasion where they get dressed up, whereas I just wear dresses all the time, and I wear all my dresses all the time. I only have three that are like special occasion dresses for really big things, but the rest of the time, like if I can't wear it every day, it's not staying in my wardrobe. So on modesty and church music, I think do an audit of like your roles, do an audit of your audience, of who's watching you, do an audience of who is looking up to you in what your area is. And you know, I suppose there's like a huge movement, isn't there, in the classical sphere about what women should wear, and sexualization and thinness and fat phobia and all of these things. Like they're all interconnected, and this is just like a tiny part of that. But modesty in my kind of area, line of work, is something that I do consider in all of my outfits, and I do consider it because I want it to align. I want to feel comfortable so that I can present myself as well as possible. I want to feel comfortable just practically so I can do what I need to do. And I want to make sure that the people that are looking at what I'm doing are not distracted, or like I don't want to detract from the work that I'm doing more broadly, or the conversations that I have to offer. And I know that like I dress to the way I dress probably provokes some people. I know it does because I get the feedback, I get the comments, I get the hate, but like nobody's sending me messages like commenting on the fact that my bum's out, or that my skirt is so short, or that you can see all my cleavage, or, you know, I'm not getting those sorts of comments because I'm dressing in a way that is particularly not inviting them, because I don't want to, like, I don't need to do that because I'm doing some great work. So I think just having an audit of like your images, your social media, if you are young, what belongs in public, what belongs in private, and what belongs in worship. And when you're a performer, how do you marry up these different like identities in a way that is giving consistent messaging to your audiences? Seize the day.